celebration and rejoicing. And and this is something God laid on my heart, and honestly, something that God has been working on me with for a little while now, because I'm terrible at it. And so, but God, the God we serve, God is a God of rejoicing, and He's a God of celebration. That that we always see Jesus while He's on earth. He's always getting everybody together to go eat, which just makes you go, man, he'd live in the South if he'd just picked, if he got to kind of choose that. But God also calls us to celebrate and rejoice. And we see that time and time again throughout the Bible, in the feasts, that He literally builds this structure for us to celebrate and to rejoice. But in our life, especially now, but I think this is always a struggle. That's why God has set up stuff the way He has, is we can get so busy that we forget to celebrate, and we can not honor the victories that we have. Y'all know what I mean? That we can not honor the victories that God's helped us with, and not rejoice in them. That we can be bound by false pride that keeps us from celebrating and rejoicing, or false humility. But we see time and time again this idea of celebration and rejoicing. And in Luke 15:21 through 24, this is English Standard Version, it says, "And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let's eat and celebrate. For my son was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and he is found." And they began to celebrate. And so in this moment, in this victory, we see a celebration take place, that the Father says, now is the time to celebrate because a victory has happened. Even simpler, we see Psalm 118:24 say, "This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." Whatever the day is, right? Let's rejoice and let's be glad in it. Let's celebrate this day because it's a day that God made it. But He wants us to celebrate, and He wants us to rejoice and keep that on our mind in context of Him, to such a degree that He even sets up these feasts, right? That we even have all these feasts in the Bible, that the Bible and the Jewish culture they more or less mandate these feasts, right? You're going to have to party, okay? Okay. But there's Passover, and there's unleavened bread, or the Feast of Sanctification. There's first fruits and Pentecost and trumpets, and the Day of Atonement and tabernacles. And then there's even other ones where new moon festivals and Sabbath year feasts and Jubilee feasts and stuff like that. And so God has all of these things He set up, and it's times to celebrate. And this isn't about feasts tonight, but all these feasts are about different things, right? That they're about different things God wants us to remember and celebrate. And in that, there are testimonies in these celebrations, right? Passover is a real easy one to highlight. There's a testimony in Passover, right? That in Egypt, and this angel of death comes over and does all this stuff and all this kind of stuff, and they get released from Egypt. And so there's this testimony that's there, but there's a time to celebrate this testimony, right? And we see again, we'll jump back to Luke 15, and this is where Jesus is talking about these parables. He's talked about, he talks about the prodigal son, or the loving father, depending on how you name that parable. But Luke 15, this is 8 through 10. This is the New King James Version. It says, "Or what women having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, Sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it. And when she has found it, she calls her friends and neighbors together, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the piece which I lost.' Likewise, I say to you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." That even there is celebration based on earthly actions, that things that happen on earth, heaven celebrates. In fact, while we were doing praise and worship, uh, uh, when we were doing praise and worship, God said something about I'm tuned in, and I was like, oh man, that's neat. What's that mean? And he gave me this picture of, well, I'm tuned in. I was like, oh, so you're really listening. You're kind of got your radio tuned to our worship. And he goes, well, I always can hear y'all's worship. He goes, I've got it tuned in heaven though. Like that's what I'm blaring on the loudspeaker right now is Global Harvest, and that there are these things that we do on earth that are celebrated in heaven, and then there's and I like this parable because we can look into this in context and go, oh well, this silver coin is very expensive, and so this she's excited because she lost it, she found it. This is talking about sinners. This is talking about bringing a sinner back, etc., etc. But if Jesus was using this parable and it wasn't contextual in a way where it made any sense, like these silver coins obviously are expensive, because this lady loses one and then she gets her neighbors and it's like, hey, y'all come over, I found it. Let's have a party because I found this coin. Well, in our culture, that doesn't make a ton of sense. If I lose a dollar bill or a 20 even, I'm probably not calling anyone to be like, come over, I found that $20 bill. But this thing, was expensive and everything. And, but there is this idea that God's, and obviously Jesus here is talking about a lost person, but he's also showing us something in this culture that he wants to highlight, right? Philippians 4:4. There's a New King James. It says, "Rejoice in the Lord always," and again I say rejoice. And so this is a one we all know, but rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. That's so important and difficult, right? That we can rejoice. We can rejoice when it's good. We can rejoice when it's bad, and we can just rejoice in the Lord. But again, he's talking about celebrate. Celebrate in me. And then Romans 12, and this is where I'm kind of going here. So Romans 12:15 says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion." This is a real kind-hearted way of saying don't be just, someone that doesn't what?
Don't be a jerk.
Don't be a jerk. Yeah, don't be a jerk. It's exactly perfect. Yeah, don't be a jerk. Like, and I'm going to come back to this verse because there's a lot of information in here, but it's talking about rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. And what I want to highlight here is the next part says, "Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with humble. Do not be wise to your own opinion." It's weird the way it structures this information because it's saying rejoice with folks, weep with folks, and don't be so high-minded that you're having a hard time doing that. And we'll come back to it. Zechariah 4:10 says, "Who dares despise the day of small things? Since the seven eyes of the Lord that range throughout the earth will rejoice when they see the chosen capstone in the hand of Zerubbabel." And I want to highlight just who dares despise the day of small things. Luke 16:10 through 12 is a similar kind of thing as far as the point that I'm trying to make here. Is Luke 10:16. Sorry, Luke 10:6. Why do I need to look up what Luke 10 is, apparently. The Lord just really wants me to say that. No. Luke 16:10-12 says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with very much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And so I want to take these kind of three things here, these three different ideas, and put them together. But where it says rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, and don't set your mind on high things, but be humble. Don't seem wise in your own opinion. So there's this, and then it talks about these small beginnings. It talks about trustworthy in these little things. But if you're trustworthy in these little things, well, that's training for bigger things, right? And a lot of times, what happens is we can do this with other people. But we can do this with ourselves too, and we can put on this false humility, and we can be, well, I'm so humble, I don't want to speak this testimony because of this blessing or something like that. I'm not gonna give this testimony of God's breakthrough because I want to be so humble that I don't want to be prideful in how I've been blessed, right? That's idiotic, but it happens. And so we can do this false humility where it's really like, well, I mean, that's a weird idea. Or we can also have this pride. We can have this pride where, well, I'm not going to say that. That's just, that's embarrassing. I'm not going to speak this testimony because it exposes me a certain way. And I'm not going to say this because it casts me in a light. Y'all know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
But it keeps us from properly honoring the victories God gives us. So we begin to stop honoring these victories, and we can say, well, this isn't a big deal, and this is where God has been working on me, is I will play down anything I do, probably 100% of the time, that I'm like, well, it's not a big deal. Well, anybody can do that, that's fine, whatever. It needed to be done, kind of thing. And I can talk myself out of a testimony of, and oh, that's pride. I don't want to be boastful, right? That I'm amazing at this. But some of it is, this is a testimony. Oh my gosh, everything's fine. Okay. Anyway.
Like anybody can build a chicken coop, right?
That's right. Exactly. That's not a big deal. And so
I can't. I already know I can't.
And so God's like, hey, you know what? You need to be, God says don't be prideful. He doesn't say don't be proud, right? We can be proud of stuff we do. God's proud of us, right? Then we can be proud of us too. And you can be proud and humble, right? Moses was the man that was the most humble ever. I mean, that's,
yeah.
We see Moses. Moses knew who he was. Jesus was humble, but he knew who he was, right? Mm-hmm. But we need to be honoring these victories God gives us. We need to be cherishing these breakthroughs, these achievements. There we go. That we have in our lives. And what happens sometimes even is, well, I'm not going to share that. That's not a big deal. And it's like, well, that is true in your opinion, right? And what happens, nope, keep reading. Okay. So Revelations 12:11 says, Rachel and me were talking about this verse today, and but Revelations 12:11 says, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to death. And by the word of their testimony, what's important here is when you read it is the way it's capitalized or not capitalized. It says by the word, and the word there, the word there, is not capitalized. This is not the Bible. This is not talking about God's word. That's not what this is talking about. This is talking about their word. It's talking about a person's word, what they're saying, and what is their testimony. Well, what's your testimony? Well, Jesus really saved me. It was really great. And it's their word that overcame. That this overcoming came from Jesus, obviously, his blood being shed, but the sharing of a word, the sharing of a testimony. And sometimes when we take our testimonies and we say, well, it's not really a big deal. I'm not going to share that. That's going to sound like I'm prideful. Or, I don't want to make some, I know someone else was trying to, or something, or this relates to them in some way. So I'm not going to share this because I know that they were looking for something similar. And then that make them sad because it didn't happen to them. Something like that. Something that the enemy would tell you so you don't share your testimony is what I'm going with. But what happens is through pride or false humility or playing down, your victory, whatever it may be, we end up keeping things that we shouldn't be keeping. There's a freedom that we hold onto, and we don't release. And we're all different people, and we have different strengths and we have different weaknesses, right? We have different experiences. We've gone through different stuff. We're at different ages. We're not all the same age. And so what ends up happening is because of these differences, what's not a big deal to you could be an undefeatable giant for someone else. That because you don't share that, I finally, did whatever I did or made it through whatever I made it through. Because you don't share it because you go, well, it's really not that big a deal. Like, it's not that big a deal. I mean, I prayed for this, it happened, but it really wasn't that big a deal. It was kind of just a nicety. Well, if we don't share that, that could be something that is literally this mountain in front of someone else that to you is not a big deal. And when we go back and we read Romans 12:15, it says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another, and do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise to your own opinion. And to me, the way I see this and the way I kind of interpret this is, we can hear people say, oh, I had this breakthrough that was amazing. It just, I didn't spend all my money on candy bars at the gas station, and I paid my gas bill this month, and I got to take a warm shower all month. And so Dan's reaction to that testimony would be something like, well, maybe if you weren't a moron, you wouldn't spend money on candy bars and just pay your gas bill. Like, that makes no sense. But for this person, this is a very difficult thing for them. And so Dan has to go, that is definitely not how God would respond, right? That is a worldly response. And in that moment that I go, man, good job. That I listen, Lord, how would you want me to react to this? And you go, that's awesome. And you listen to how God reacts, right? Because in that moment, God goes, man, I'm so proud of you. You did something that literally, we'd all probably, hopefully no one's struggling with that, but that we'd all just be like, well, that's just being a responsible adult. Like, but there are people that have things that are similar to this, maybe this example, and it's like, that's a step. And we can celebrate with them in this testimony that, man, I was about to pick up that candy bar. I knew once I'd do that, I just can't stop. And the Lord said, let me be your Snickers. And I said, yes, Lord. And I just walked out of the gas station. And then we can celebrate with them. No matter how idiotic it is to us, right? Because we're not going to, like this says, we're not going to be so wise in our own opinion. That our own opinion's so wise that it's like, well, just don't do something stupid. Well, that's not the reaction God would have. Right. That's not correct. Because the giant they're dealing with is not a giant to you. And that's what's so important, because someone else may be in a place where this person with this, I mean, it would have to be like a significant eating disorder, I guess. I don't know. It would be insane if you're just spending all your money. But it may be breakthrough for someone else, that they hear someone go, you know what? I don't do candy bars, but I do whatever, something other ridiculous thing that wouldn't be offensive to anyone is. And so, but it brings breakthrough in that moment. And they go, so how did you do it? You know, they walk over to this candy bar person and they're like, so how did you do that? And they're like, you know, I just focused on the Lord, and I did this and this, and this is what brought breakthrough to me, you know, and it really is one of those things where it's like we end up, and so we always want to be able to rejoice with people, and at the same time we don't want to be like, well, I mean, you know, I'm just doing what everybody else does, you know, so I'm not going to give this testimony because I'm just paying my bills just like everybody else does, right? And I'm just being responsible, so I'm not going to share this because that's, you know, it's a victory in my life, but I'm not going to share it. And what ends up happening is that when we don't share the victories in our own life, big or small, we keep keys of freedom from other people. That if I don't know what you've dealt with, then I can't ask how you got a victory over it. You know, and what a lot of times, and this is testimonies all over the place, that it can be something like, oh man, I got a check in the mail that was really super awesome because it was a rebate on something that I didn't even know or whatever. Or, you know what, my car was acting super weird, and then I figured out that there was a recall on this super weird thing, and I just got it fixed for free, or whatever it is. And it's like, you know, in these moments that we don't keep these things to ourselves, and it can be stuff that simple, but it can also be like, man, I was, you know, I was so addicted to candy bars that I was spending all my money and not paying my bills, and it was so shameful, and I just had chocolate all over my face, but I overcame by the blood of the Lamb, and then someone can go, man, if you got that kind of freedom, then I can get that kind of freedom. And it can be it and what happens is this, apparently this is just the example I'm going to use the rest of the night. But what the enemy will do is be like, candy bar dude, you are a lunatic, and you do not need to share this with anybody because you are not a smart person. And they will bring shame to such a degree that it keeps that key from anyone else. And God's like, hey, you know what? That's over. That's done. I'm done. Yeah, I've finished with this. It's a victory now. We're not talking about the fight. We're talking about the victory. Like, this is what he was fighting with, but that's over. The victory is what is present, and that's what we're going to focus on. And now I can share this. You know, this dude could share it and bring victory to someone else. Like, you know, I collect baseball cards to an obscene amount, and I do not. That's not a damn thing. I don't like baseball. I cannot watch that. But anyway, but you know, if it's someone and that dude goes to this candy bar dude and it's like, hey, how'd you do it? And it brings a key. Y'all know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so often we keep these things to us because we say, well, that kind of brings shame, or well, that, you know, that maybe that makes me look like I'm being prideful or something, and or boasting, which is real simple. And or well, that's insignificant, and that's really that's the one I typically have a hard time with. So I'll just go like, well, that's insignificant. I'm not going to share that. That's insignificant.